What is up, guys? This is Sugi here, and today I'm gonna be reviewing a game that is not exactly a JRPG, but very close to that, and that is the Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp for the Nintendo Switch. And this is basically a remake of the first Advance Wars games released for Game Boy Advance. This is a franchise that has existed for quite some time, I believe on SNES and Game Boy Color, but I think these were the first two that got released in the West though, and also probably had the best ratings and the best sales altogether, so it kind of makes sense that they decided to go with these two specifically. Now, the game is kind of like a tactics, it's somewhat akin to Fire Emblem, but there's not exactly like any RPG elements inside. There's a lot of this sort of a rock, paper, scissors type of a, system, which I will kind of like break down in the beginning of this video. Now, this game altogether, if you put out the two campaigns together, it can be up to 50 hours to complete. So there's a lot of like bang for the buck, so to speak. For me personally, it took around 46 hours to complete this game. There are a lot of these optional missions, especially on the second campaign, which you don't need to do. But if you're going to be playing absolutely everything, there's a lot to be, get out from this game. And obviously there's like a hot seat co-op for the game, so people can play with each other on one console, and then there's online, and then you can create your own maps and etc. Now let's kind of break down a bit of the story first. Now this is not exactly a game you play for the story, it is absolutely generic. There's not, a very big world building, especially, like, they don't really explain about the conflict or the war. It's just that this is the theme, that there are tanks, there are airplanes, there are warships and etc. And they happen to be battling with these other nations, but their motives are not really, like, explored at all. It's kind of like very comedic in that sense, that they're just casually invading other countries, and there's not like territorial disputes or anything. And the story, you follow basically the Orange Star group, which is like consisting of 3 major characters, and all the other nations have their characters as well, which you get to unlock as you play throughout the campaign. And then there will be eventually like this major villain, which will be revealed in the end of the first campaign, which will be playing as like the main villain also throughout the second game. And the second campaign, in terms of the story, is pretty much the same as the first one in terms of its quality, but maybe the setup is more interesting in terms of like the gameplay and everything. But the game is mostly the same throughout the first 2 campaigns. And well, there's one unit that gets introduced in the second game and some other elements, but mostly they are the very same game. Now, the core gameplay is actually very good. That is, the very big main draw here. It's kind of like rock, paper, scissors. You have certain units that are really good against others. You have like anti-air tanks. You have recons, which are scouts, which give you vision and can travel really fast. And then you have like different types of tanks, which like do a lot of damage, but they're kind of slow, and they obviously cannot like shoot at air units. And then you have like bombers, which drop bombs on like infantry and etc. So there's a lot of different like units. And then you have COs, which stand for the commanding officer, and these commanding officers basically have like passive traits. So certain commanding officers have like better tanks in terms of like their stats, some have like higher range, and then they have like weak naval units, and some have like better air units, for example. So there's like these bit of like a difference between them. And once they also have like this power bar on the top, which you get by fighting, this will basically get charged up, and then you can release this special ability, which can basically change the tide in the battle. This is anywhere from healing your units or giving them partial defense and more damage to certain units. Like this only gives damage to ground units and stuff like that. And there are some like balancing issues when it comes to these commanding officers. Like some are just clearly better than the others, but there's a bit of a different play style. It's not like anybody has like unique units to them. In the campaign, the Orange Star units in the second campaign can you access this Neo tank, which no other faction has the access to. But outside from that, like they are kind of similar how they work. Outside from this special ability and having like an infinite strength, base strength on like the ground units or like air or naval, for example. And so, as I said, like the gameplay is very good. You have like different terrain. In certain terrain, you get a lot more defense, like in cities. If you also leave your units in cities, they will heal up on there. Then there's like fuel systems. So as you travel, you run out of fuel, but then you have like APCs, which basically can refuel your machines and stuff like that. And then obviously, most units also have ammo, so you have to refuel their ammo as well. Most of the time, like the ammo and the fuel is not something that is going to be running out. On certain campaign maps it's going to, so you're not going to be having to plan too much on like, you know, saving your gas and stuff like that, but it's a very nice element added into the game. Like the base core gameplay is really nice, and there's a lot of differentiation between the maps. Some have no naval units, some have more like islands, and some like are, you know, a bit more darker, you can't see the map, so there's a lot of variation, especially on the second campaign. The first campaign maybe had a bit more monotone style maps and objectives, like, and those objectives can be destroying all enemies, capturing their HQ, or surviving a certain amount of turns, or bringing a certain unit to a certain location on the map. But mostly it was like, destroy the enemy base, and that's how you win. And that was kind of like the format that was followed like 80% of the times, and sometimes there were like special objectives which you needed to destroy, and that was like a more of a campaign theme that existed on the second campaign a lot more. But fundamentally, yeah, like the core gameplay is what Advance War is all about, and if you don't like the gameplay, you're probably not going to be enjoying any other aspects about the game. Like, this is what the whole game is really built around, and it was a really cool game to play back in on Game Boy Advance, and you know, like, you know, shuffling the device between friends, because you could play hot seat basically with it, and so you can do it also with this Switch version. Now, on top of the main campaigns, there's also co-op, allowing you to play up to 4 friends, which is nice, but I wish there would have been like opportunity to play like bigger maps, so I could play with like 3 other friends alongside with myself, and then add like 2 NPCs playing like, you know, the computer factions basically. So that would have been kind of cool, and maybe having like these very, very large maps, that wouldn't been super like straining for you know, the device or anything like that. So that was something where like maybe a missed opportunity. But you know, like, I mean, I come from like Total War games, so I really like these big campaign maps, and but obviously, like, you know, when you play a hot seat with your friends, it can take you know, quite some time depending on what settings you have. And then there's also custom maps which you can create inside the game, and there's a lot of things that you will be unlocking as you play through the campaign, which allows you to do different things on those own maps. To my understanding, there's a lot more options and variability compared to the old versions of the game, and I actually don't remember there being custom map creation on these 2 games, but I could be wrong about it because I kind of had a limited experience with Advance Wars on the Game Boy Advance. Now, there are some problems in this game, though. It's not like sunshine and rainbows. Like, first of the problems is the soundtrack. So, in the game, the music is playing, the theme that is playing on the game is based on whose turn it is. So when it's enemy turn, their theme song is playing. When it's my turn, my theme is playing. And in some maps you get to play with multiple COs. So obviously there's going to be a bit of variety with these tracks. But the original tracks on Game Boy Advance just fundamentally sound a lot better than these remastered ones. Yeah, they don't have this more like a chippy, chip tunes kind of a, you know, sound to them. They in these like heavy bass, which I kind of like, you know, on the OG soundtrack. But the problem is that these theme songs are like 2 minutes long, and there's not really like other songs inside the game, you know. And there's a bit of a dialogue in the campaign, in the story, but it's mostly like same 5 tracks that play over and over again. And it's like really redundant, like playing a map for 2 hours and having a 2-minute song basically loop around. Like, there's no variety here. There's not like the length could have been increased or something like that. The tracks are so monotone, and this is like the first time in many, many years that I've actually been absolutely disgusted with a soundtrack before. Like, it's not that necessarily the tracks themselves are super awful. Most of them are like very simplistic and awful, and worse versions than in Advance. But the fact is that they are all looping around. Some of the maps are going to be lasting like hour or even 3 hours long, and you have to listen to those 2 songs on a repeat over and over again. So I just ended up playing a lot of the game by switching off the music because it was so annoying to listen to those same tracks over and over again. And that's something that they definitely should have improved in the design. Now, in terms of the audio, I guess it's okay. There's not full voice acting, which is something that maybe people would have wanted to see, but that's obviously what WayForward as a studio, if you are familiar with the Shantae games, which are good Metroidvania games, they didn't also have like fully voice acted, you know, story, only in the cutscenes basically, which is kind of the same case here. But I do like the art style here. That's something that needs to be added. It's not going for this retro style. They kind of, you know, not re-energize, but refurbish the style that existed on the old games. Some people maybe would have just wanted to have HD versions of the old ones, and that could have been cool too. But I think this is actually quite nice. Now, but what to say, yes, there's not a full voice acting inside the game. For me, it wasn't a big issue, but for some people it may be. Now, then there are some really bad quality of life changes which are missing inside the game. So there is a rewind button inside the game. I think it's the holding down the ZF, or is it ZR, sorry. And that basically makes everything like move a bit faster, but I don't like, you know, in any game to basically hold down the key button because it puts a strain into your finger. So just having an option to basically toggle in a faster speed is just like a lot more convenient way to do it. And even with the 2x speed, it's actually not going that fast. And to kind of bring it back to what I talked about earlier is the similarity between Fire Emblem. Playing Fire Emblem Engage earlier this year, you had the ability to basically skip out the enemy turn altogether. You had also an auto battle feature, which wouldn't make necessarily a lot of sense in this type of a game. But like having the ability to not watch the enemy's turns or just go 10x speed on his turn would have been a very good quality of life change. Even if you toggle off the animations, it actually takes quite a long time to basically have the enemy to, you know, do his turn, because you can't switch off their like CO powers animations and when they are using certain like structures on the map, like these big cannons and stuff, so you can't really like rewind those to the same extent as you are with the other things. So I felt like there was, especially when I was replaying some of these maps, I felt like it was like really annoying to watch their turns over and over again, because it didn't really matter to me. I would always look at the map once he had done his turns and then like reassess what I'm going to be doing, because it's turn based. I don't need to see the turns. I just need to see my, you know, what units I have left after the attack and, you know, how much health they have and etc. So this was really like annoying type of thing which they could have fixed out. So by adding more speed or just having a toggle for the speed and make things go faster, and obviously having the opportunity to skip turns would have been so much more better for this game. Because even though like you have all of these quality of life changes, the maps do take quite a long, even on strategy game scale. Like you don't really have many campaigns in Age of Empires, in StarCraft, which take over 1 hour. It's just not very normal. Now, another issue that I kind of ran into the game was it was crashing. Like, and that's very like, I remember maybe one PS5 game which has crashed on me, and one PS4 game, and on Nintendo Switch, maybe I remember one time Fire Emblem Engage crashing on me, or Three Houses crashing on me. And that's just my issue here, fundamentally, that the game did crash 4 times on the last map. Luckily, it does autosave, so you get to continue where you're from, but you have to watch all the intro cutscenes and basically load back into the game. It's not exactly great. You don't want to have your game crashing on you, and there were simple times. I wasn't like hacking the fucking or homebrewing my Switch or anything. It was just crashing on me on some of these maps, and usually it has something to do with the commanding officers using their ability, and then it would just crash. And it was kind of annoying. It happened at least maybe 8 times in my whole playthrough, which was like 46 hours. So in terms of like time scale, not so much, but it's like still, I don't want the games crash, and I like expect a lot more from like, you know, Nintendo quality compared to any other game really. And last thing I have to tackle, which was one of the big problems, was the balancing in the game. We talked a bit about the COs being somewhat incredibly weaker than the others. And they have 2 difficulty systems here. You have casual and you have classic. Classic is the exact same as it was in Advance Wars. And the only thing with casual is that you get like 1 or 2 starting units, and maybe a couple of these neutral city buildings are already captured to you, versus on the normal difficulty. But the problem here is that even when you are like a chess beginner, just because you give the opposing player an extra pawn is not necessarily going to be making much of a big difference, because you're not changing the base stats in the game. The damages are still the same, and for the most part, in my opinion, the AI of the enemy was definitely about to be same level on Classic as it was in Casual, in my opinion, so it was as smart. I played the first campaign throughout Classic, and then somewhere midway on the second game's campaign I went to Casual, because there were like some things that were really annoying. And I think in general, like when you give people the option to choose which CEO you're going to be choosing for this mission, you just should have a lot more viability of going on with a certain CEO and completing the map with that, instead of like having to really fundamentally choose from like 2 different viable options, because the maps would get just really hard and they would snowball on you. And usually in most maps, like the enemy just have so much more money to basically build out units, so you would get overrun at some point, and eventually he would snowball on you and he wouldn't like make a comeback. So I think the balancing was a fundamental issue in the game. There could have been a lot more easier casual version of the strategy, like, you know, just the difficulty, which would be a lot more easier. Like, this is not what I would expect from the easiest difficulty from the game. Like, there were a couple of maps I played 5 times over, and well, I didn't make it to that last map on 2 tries, but it just like there were like balancing issues. And then I also felt like in certain maps were like incredibly easy, and some maps were just like really hard. So the difficulty bounced around quite a lot in certain maps. And obviously I didn't play exactly every single one in the second campaign, so I don't even know if there were some really hard ones which I just didn't play. But like overall, like, it's a good game. It's just that sad that this balancing problem, which probably they didn't want to change too much because it would change the game so much drastically, but it's not really that hard to add like a easier difficulty in, and just like a couple of these quality of life changes which wouldn't like make the game like run a bit faster and just like be a lot more like accountable, not accountable, but like more like, you know, hospitable to modern gaming. Because when you remaster these games, there are always game mechanics which just have become outdated, and we acknowledge that, okay, this game mechanic is not very cool, it's not very dated anymore, and it doesn't really make any sense in a modern device. And that's something that I would have wished to see a lot more. But I do actually hope that they are going to be trying to do a new Advance Wars games, which would be akin to these two, but there would be maybe a bit more units added in, and maybe there would have been some other quality of life changes which would have made the game a bit more varied and interesting over the run, you know, or they run the campaigns. But overall, it's a good game. If you have a lot of friends in your house, like a brother or a girlfriend or a wife, I mean, you guys don't have that stuff, but you know, if let's believe that you would, it would have been actually like a cool game to play with your friends on a one Switch. So that's one of the abilities you can do with this game. So that's actually kind of cool. But thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more, and I will be seeing you next time. Cheers.